Everyone expected a routine interview until Traoré went off script and cornered Trump with allegations that had never been said aloud on live TV. The studio lights were bright and unrelenting, casting sharp shadows on the polished floor of the television set in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The atmosphere was charged, but not in the usual way. Tonight's live broadcast was supposed to be just another political interview, routine and predictable. Ibrahim Traoré, a respected journalist known for his relentless pursuit of truth, was set to sit down with Donald Trump, the former president who still commanded a massive following and fierce opposition. Viewers tuning in expected the typical back and forth, the kind of carefully measured conversation designed to avoid real conflict. But behind the cameras, something was different. Traoré wasn't here for pleasantries. His notes were thick, his questions sharpened with months of research, and his intention clear: to hold power accountable no matter the cost. As the countdown to live rolled, the production crew exchanged nervous glances. They knew this wasn't going to be a smooth ride. "Good evening, everyone," Traoré began as the broadcast went live. His voice was calm but firm. "Tonight, we have Mr. Donald Trump joining us. Mr. Trump, thank you for being here." Trump, sitting comfortably in a leather chair, smiled broadly. "Thank you for having me. Looking forward to a great discussion." The camera cut to the audience, a modest studio crowd buzzing with anticipation. The energy in the room was electric. People leaned forward, waiting to see if this would just be another televised performance or something more real. Traoré started with a familiar question, his tone professional yet unyielding. "Mr. Trump, many people have been eager to hear your side regarding the various investigations and allegations swirling around your business dealings in your time in office. How do you respond to those who say you've crossed legal and ethical lines?" Trump's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Look, I've done nothing wrong. These so-called investigations are a witch hunt. Everyone knows it. I'm a businessman, a deal maker. I've built a tremendous empire and people are just jealous." The exchange seemed routine at first, but those paying close attention noticed the subtle tension creeping in. Traoré didn't blink. He pressed on. "But, sir, there are documents, testimonies, and even whistleblowers who claim otherwise. How do you explain those?" Trump's eyes narrowed and the muscles in his jaw tightened ever so slightly. "Fake news, lies, people trying to bring me down because they can't accept that I'm successful." Behind the scenes, the producers held their breath. Traoré's follow-up question was coming, and everyone knew it would cut deeper. Then, without hesitation, Traoré leaned forward slightly, voice lowering but steady. "Mr. Trump, on this very stage, I want to ask, are you willing to address the accusations of fraud, obstruction, and abuse of power directly? Will you speak to the American people honestly tonight?" The room seemed to hold its breath. Trump's usual confidence wavered just a bit. "I've said it before, I did nothing wrong. But if you want to play this game, let's play." There it was. The moment the interview shifted from a formal conversation to a public confrontation. The audience shifted in their seats, eyes glued to the screen. The news anchors watching from their control room shared quiet, stunned looks. This wasn't just a discussion anymore. It was a challenge laid bare on national television. Outside the studio, social media exploded. Hashtags trended within minutes. Clips from the interview began circulating before the segment was even finished airing. But no one could predict what was coming next. The calm before the storm was over, and the real battle was about to begin. The tension in the studio was palpable as the cameras rolled on. Traoré's gaze was steady, almost piercing, while Trump's usual bravado seemed just a shade less certain than before. The air between them crackled with an unspoken challenge. This was no ordinary interview. Traoré broke the silence first. Mr. Trump, let me start with a simple question. Why do you think so many people believe you've hidden the truth about your financial dealings? Why has this issue followed you since your presidency? Trump chuckled, but it lacked warmth. Because the media loves to spin stories that sell. People want drama. I'm a target because I shake things up. But I'm transparent, always have been. Traoré wasn't convinced. Transparency means being open, Mr. Trump. It means allowing investigators access to documents, answering questions honestly. Yet, we've seen lawsuits, subpoenas, even refusals to comply with court orders. How is that transparency? Trump's smile thinned. Those are political games, nothing more. I don't owe anyone my business records. I've done nothing illegal. The exchange was sharp, but both men kept their voices steady, careful not to let emotions spill too soon. It was clear Traoré intended to cut through the carefully built defenses. I want to talk about something specific, Traoré said, pulling out a folder from the table. There are reports about financial transactions that allegedly involved foreign entities and shell companies designed to hide assets. Can you deny any involvement in such activities? Trump's eyes flickered briefly toward the folder, then back to Traoré. This is nonsense, fake allegations to distract from the real issues. But these aren't just rumors, Traoré pressed. Documents have been submitted to courts in Delaware and Florida. Some even trace back to offshore accounts in the Caribbean. This isn't speculation anymore. It's evidence. For the first time, Trump's composure cracked just for a second. You think this means something? These are businesses. People do all kinds of things to protect their interests. It's called strategy. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Traoré's voice dropped, sharper now. When does strategy cross into illegality? When does protecting interests become fraud? There are witnesses ready to testify that you knowingly misled banks and investors. Trump's response was swift, a flash of anger surfacing. You're accusing me of crimes? This is a witch hunt and I won't stand for it. Traoré didn't flinch. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm asking you to answer. On record, live. Trump leaned back, breathing harder. I've said it before. There's nothing here. Just a media circus. Traoré nodded slightly, as if expecting this answer. What about obstruction? There are reports you pressured officials to interfere with investigations, that you tried to use your influence to stop inquiries. Trump's face hardened. That's a lie. Anyone who says that is lying. I'm being persecuted. The energy shifted. The calm professionalism from both men gave way to something raw. Impatience, frustration. The interview was no longer controlled. It was unraveling. Traoré's next question landed like a punch. Mr. Trump, how do you respond to the claims that under your watch, laws were broken and the country's trust was damaged? Trump's voice rose. This is a disgrace. I did more for this country than most people ever will. I built jobs, made deals, put America first, and now I'm being attacked by people who want to tear me down. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The line between truth and performance blurred. Then Traoré spoke with deliberate calm. Mr. Trump, you've had a chance to speak, but the American people deserve to know the whole story, not just your version. Trump's eyes narrowed. You think you're the one to tell me that? I don't think so. The exchange grew heated, voices rising, the hostility palpable. From the control room, the director called for a commercial break, sensing the tension was about to spill over. But the damage was done. Viewers already sensed this interview was heading somewhere dangerous, and that it was going to get ugly. The polite mask was slipping, and soon the real battle would be impossible to contain. When the cameras returned from the commercial break, the atmosphere had shifted. What was once a tense but civil exchange had taken on a sharper edge. Ibrahim Traoré adjusted his notes but didn't look away from Trump, who was now visibly less comfortable. His usual confident posture seemed a bit forced, and his eyes flickered with impatience. Traoré wasted no time. "Mr. Trump, I'm going to be direct. There are allegations not just of financial misconduct, but of serious criminal behavior, including fraud, money laundering, and abuse of power during your presidency. Are you prepared to respond to these charges?" A murmur spread through the studio audience. The question wasn't new, but hearing it phrased so bluntly on live television caught many off guard. Trump leaned forward, his voice sharp. "This is ridiculous. These accusations come from people who want to see me fail. I haven't done anything illegal, not a single thing." Traoré nodded slowly. "Then let's talk specifics. For example, there's evidence suggesting that during your administration, you used your influence to pressure foreign governments to interfere in domestic politics for your benefit. How do you explain that?" Trump's face darkened. "This is fake news, pure and simple. Anyone who says that is either lying or looking for attention." "But there are recordings," Traoré pressed. "Audio and documents released recently show your team discussing strategies to influence elections abroad and block investigations at home. People are named, actions are documented." Trump's voice rose, shaking with anger. "Those so-called recordings are doctored. They're fabricated lies by people desperate to take me down." The studio was silent except for the two voices clashing. It felt like a public trial without a judge, with millions watching to catch every nuance. Traoré leaned in, lowering his voice but keeping the intensity. "What about allegations of financial fraud involving inflated asset values to secure loans and evade taxes? There are whistleblowers ready to testify they were ordered to manipulate records." Trump's hands clenched on the armrests. "Those are baseless claims. My businesses are audited and follow the law. You want to believe these stories? Go ahead, but they're lies." Traoré's next question was even sharper. "Do you deny that your campaign coordinated with foreign agents to influence the 2016 election? Evidence suggests direct communication." Trump slammed his palm lightly on the table. "I have no idea what you're talking about. This is just more nonsense." For a moment, the air crackled with tension as both men stared each other down. The interview was no longer about asking questions. It was a battle of wills. Then Traoré brought up the most explosive claim yet. "There are allegations that you ordered illegal payments to silence people who had damaging information about you. Witnesses say these actions crossed legal boundaries and could be criminal." Trump's eyes narrowed dangerously. "This is the lowest of lows, smearing people with lies to attack me. I've never broken the law. This is a political hit job." The audience shifted uneasily. Some nodded in agreement, others looked stunned by the accusations laid bare in front of them. Traoré's tone softened slightly but remained firm. "Mr. Trump, these are serious charges. The American people deserve answers, not denials. Are you willing to allow a full investigation with no interference?" Trump's response was immediate and fierce. "No, I won't allow witch hunts to destroy my name. People should look at what I've done for the country instead of these lies." A producer off camera signaled the time, but neither man moved. The silence that followed was thick, charged with the weight of what had just been said. Then Traoré spoke again, his voice steady but with an edge of warning. "History will judge the truth, Mr. Trump. Tonight, the world is watching." Trump stared back, a mix of defiance and frustration in his eyes. "Let them watch. I'm ready for whatever comes." The cameras cut to a wide shot, capturing the tension that had transformed the interview into a live confrontation. Social media lit up instantly. Clips of the accusations began circulating, sparking debate and outrage across the country. Viewers felt like witnesses to something historic, a moment when long-held suspicions and fears exploded onto a public stage in an unforgettable way. The stage was set, and the battle lines were drawn. What came next would change everything. The studio's air grew heavier as the cameras continued rolling. What had started as a carefully moderated discussion was now unraveling before the nation's eyes. Donald Trump, usually composed in public, was beginning to show cracks in his armor, his jaw clenched tightly, eyes flashing with irritation and something more volatile: anger. "You think you can just throw accusations around and expect me to sit here quietly?" Trump snapped, voice louder than before. "I've dealt with tougher critics, believe me, but this is a disgrace." Ibrahim Traoré remained steady, undeterred by the sudden outburst. "Mr. Trump, the American people are watching. They deserve transparency, not temper tantrums." Trump's face reddened. "Temper tantrums? I'm defending myself against lies. You're playing into the hands of my enemies, trying to tear down everything I've built." The tension spiked. The audience shifted in their seats, some murmuring quietly, others holding their breath. Traoré didn't back down. "You've called investigations witch hunts, but your actions speak louder than words. There are credible reports that you pressured officials to obstruct justice, threatened witnesses, and even sought to manipulate the legal system to your advantage. How do you respond to that?" Trump's fist slammed down on the armrest. "I did nothing wrong. If anyone tried to obstruct justice, it wasn't me. It's the people trying to take me down. This is a political coup, and I won't be a part of it." For a moment, the two men locked eyes, the weight of their confrontation filling the room. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was personal. Traoré leaned forward, voice calm but unyielding. "These aren't opinions, Mr. Trump. There are documents, recordings, and sworn testimonies. Some of your closest aides have come forward. The truth is catching up." Trump's lips pressed into a thin line. "People lie. Everyone lies. You want me to accept that? Never." The hostility was now raw and exposed. Trump's polished veneer had shattered, replaced by fury and defiance. But Traoré kept his composure, asking the questions the public demanded. "Let me ask you this. What about the claims that you used your platform to incite violence, that your words have endangered lives and undermined democracy itself?" Trump's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I've always been a patriot. If people took my words the wrong way, that's on them. I speak to millions. I'm not responsible for every reaction." "But responsibility isn't just about intent," Traoré pressed. "It's about impact. Millions watched you, believed you, and when violence erupted, the country fractured." Trump scoffed. "That's the fake narrative pushed by the media. I want unity, but I won't apologize for speaking the truth." Traoré's voice softened, almost mournful. "Mr. Trump, the truth matters because it shapes our future. Leadership isn't just about power, it's about accountability." The silence that followed was deafening. For once, Trump seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Then, as if deciding to fight with everything he had left, he leaned closer to the microphone. "I won't be bullied. I won't be silenced. This country needs strength, not these endless attacks." The exchange was intense, the emotions raw. The studio audience sat frozen, witnessing a clash that felt more like a showdown than an interview. Outside, the reactions poured in. Social media exploded with debates. Supporters defended Trump's passion, while critics saw the outburst as proof of guilt. The producers prepared to cut the segment short, worried the situation might spiral beyond control. But the damage was done. The world had witnessed a breaking point. What had been a controlled conversation was now a battlefield, and no one was walking away unscathed. While the cameras kept rolling in the studio, an entirely different kind of storm was brewing behind the scenes. In a cramped control room filled with monitors and frantic staff, producers, directors, and political advisors watched the live broadcast unfold, their faces etched with worry and tension. Maria Delgado, the senior producer, tapped her fingers nervously on the console. This is turning into something no one expected. We're supposed to be neutral, just delivering the news. But this feels like it could blow up. Beside her, Jake Ellison, the network's chief political analyst, shook his head. Ibrahim's playing hardball, no doubt. He's bringing the heat with those allegations. Trump's cracking, but he's not going down without a fight. A young assistant furiously typed notes into a laptop, eyes darting between screens showing live reactions from social media feeds. Hashtags like #TruthOrLie and live confrontation were trending within minutes. Clips of Trump's outburst were being shared and dissected, polarizing viewers across the nation. In another corner, political consultant Thomas Green was on the phone speaking rapidly. We need damage control and fast. The former president's team is spinning this as a media attack. We have to mobilize supporters and push back against the narrative. Meanwhile, on the other side of the studio complex, a small group of staff monitored incoming messages from viewers. Many were shocked, some outraged, others confused. One message popped up repeatedly. Is this really happening live? It feels like a political soap opera. Traoré's producer, Lena Watts, watched her boss intently, pride mixing with anxiety. He's taking a huge risk tonight, but if anyone can hold that line, it's him. Back in the studio, technical director Sam Cho clicked a button to switch camera angles, capturing the rising tension on screen. Get ready to cut to the break if this gets out of hand, he said quietly. Despite all the preparation, no one was prepared for how quickly the situation escalated. The broadcast was no longer just an interview. It was becoming a defining moment in political history. Outside the studio, newsrooms across the country buzzed with activity. Journalists scrambled to interpret the live confrontation, spinning out headlines and debating what it meant for Trump's political future. Calls came flooding into political talk shows. What does this say about accountability and leadership? One host asked. Are we witnessing the fall of a political titan, or just another act in a long-running saga? On cable networks, pundits argued fiercely. Some defended Trump's right to push back against accusations, while others condemned his apparent refusal to accept responsibility. But amid the chaos, one thing was clear. The confrontation was more than entertainment. It was forcing a nation to confront uncomfortable truths about power, truth, and justice. The pressure on both men was enormous. Traoré had thrown down the gauntlet, demanding answers that many feared to ask. Trump, feeling cornered, was fighting not just for his reputation, but for control of his legacy. Back in the studio, Maria Delgado sighed deeply. Whatever happens next, this night is going to be remembered, no matter who wins or loses. The live broadcast resumed with Traoré preparing to press further, the studio silent but charged with anticipation. Behind the camera lenses, the real battle was playing out, one that could change everything on and off the screen. As the broadcast went off the air, the studio emptied quickly, but the impact of what had just happened rippled far beyond those walls. The moments of confrontation between Ibrahim Traoré and Donald Trump had sent shockwaves through the political landscape, and the fallout was only beginning. In a small cafe in Charleston, South Carolina, Sarah Monroe, a school teacher, watched the interview on her tablet with a mixture of disbelief and concern. I didn't expect it to get that heated, she said to a friend, but honestly, it makes me wonder what else is being hidden from us. Across the country in Tacoma, Washington, Marcus Riley, a small business owner, scrolled through social media feeds littered with clips and commentary from the interview. "I'm not a fan of Trump, but seeing him snap like that? It feels like he's under real pressure," he admitted. "I just want the truth." Meanwhile, political commentators were already lining up to analyze every word, every gesture. News shows replayed the most explosive moments, dissecting the body language, the choice of words, and what it all meant for the former president's future. Senator Elaine Vasquez, a rising star in Washington politics, weighed in during a televised interview. This confrontation reveals serious questions about accountability. Leadership demands transparency, especially at this level. The American people deserve answers, not evasions. In response, Trump's legal team issued a statement calling the interview a coordinated attack by biased media and political opponents and vowed to fight back in court and public opinion. The political divide deepened as supporters rallied behind Trump, condemning Traoré's tactics as unfair and aggressive. Opposition groups seized on the revelations, demanding official investigations and greater scrutiny. On Twitter and other platforms, debates flared between friends, families, and strangers. The nation seemed caught in a storm of conflicting narratives, each side convinced of their truth. In a community center in Des Moines, Iowa, local activist Jamal Griffin led a discussion group. "This interview is a wake-up call," he said passionately. "We can't afford to ignore corruption or abuse of power. But we also have to listen carefully, verify facts, and hold everyone accountable. No exceptions." Back in the newsrooms, editors grappled with the responsibility of reporting on such a volatile story. Headlines varied widely. "Trump on the defensive. Live confrontation rocks political world. Calls for accountability grow louder." The media frenzy wasn't just about ratings. It was about how a nation wrestled with the realities of power, truth, and justice. The interview had cracked open a door that many hoped would lead to greater clarity, but it also exposed deep divisions and distrust. Legal experts began weighing in, predicting prolonged battles ahead. "This is far from over," said attorney Claire Simmons in a podcast. "We're looking at potential investigations, court cases, and political repercussions that could last for years." For Traoré, the stakes couldn't have been higher. His bold approach had made headlines worldwide, but he knew this was just the beginning. "The truth is never easy," he told a reporter after the broadcast. "It takes courage to face it and responsibility to follow through." Trump, meanwhile, retreated to his private residence in Palm Beach, Florida, surrounded by advisors working overtime to contain the damage and prepare for what was next. Public appearances were canceled and statements carefully crafted. In living rooms, diners, and workplaces across America, people debated what they had witnessed. Some felt vindicated, others defensive. But nearly everyone agreed on one thing. The conversation about leadership and accountability had shifted, perhaps forever. The first shockwaves had passed, but the aftershocks would continue to shape the nation's future. The day after the explosive broadcast, the conversation spilled beyond television screens and social media feeds. Ordinary people from all walks of life found themselves grappling with what they had just seen. In small towns and big cities, in diners and living rooms, the debate was alive and intense. In Boise, Idaho, retired nurse Evelyn Harper sat with her grandchildren, trying to explain the complexity of the interview. "It's hard to understand all the politics," she said softly. "But what matters is that people in power have to be honest. If they don't, no one can trust them." Meanwhile, in Fort Worth, Texas, college student Jameer Reed recorded a video message. Watching that interview made me realize how important it is to question authority. We can't just accept what we're told. We have to dig deeper, ask tough questions, and hold leaders accountable. A group of factory workers in Dayton, Ohio, shared their opinions over lunch. "I'm tired of politicians lying to us," said one. "If these allegations are true, they need to face the consequences." But not everyone was convinced. At a country club in Scottsdale, Arizona, businesswoman Claire Langley defended Trump. "I think this was a setup. The media's out to get him because he's not part of their elite. You have to look at both sides before making judgments." The variety of opinions reflected the nation's fractured state. Yet, beneath the surface, a shared concern echoed. Trust in leadership was fragile, and many felt it had been broken. Local radio shows became forums for heated discussions. Callers shared personal stories of frustration with politics, fears for the future, and hopes for justice. One caller from Madison, Wisconsin said, "We need leaders who are honest, not just good talkers." Political analysts pointed to the significance of this moment. "Public reaction is key," explained Dr. Lena Carter, a political science professor at the University of Portland. This interview didn't just challenge Trump, it challenged the system. People are watching, reacting, and demanding change. Some activists organized town hall meetings, urging citizens to stay informed and engaged. "This is about more than one person," said organizer Michael Benson in Albuquerque, New Mexico. "It's about the principles we stand for: honesty, fairness, justice." Social media continued to be a battleground. Videos of the confrontation were shared millions of times, with users debating the facts and interpretations. Some posts called for peaceful dialogue. Others fanned the flames of division. But amid the noise, a quieter movement took shape. People seeking common ground, wanting to understand rather than just argue. Journalist and podcast host Maria Ortiz highlighted this shift. "In times like these, empathy becomes essential," she said in a recent episode. "We need to listen to each other, respect differing views, and focus on solutions that rebuild trust." The interview's impact was clear. It had sparked a national conversation not only about one man's actions, but about the very nature of leadership and democracy. For many, it was a moment to reflect on their own values. "I realized we all have a role to play," said Evelyn Harper. "Being informed, speaking up, and holding everyone accountable, that's how we protect our future." As the public voices grew louder, the question remained: would the political system respond, or would it continue to spiral into mistrust and division? The people had spoken, but the story was far from over. 2 days after the broadcast, just when it seemed the public furor might settle into a routine political argument, a new wave of revelation shattered that possibility. A former senior staffer from Trump's 2020 campaign, whose name had remained hidden for months, stepped forward under federal whistleblower protection. His name was Preston Aldridge, a quiet, detail-oriented strategist known more for spreadsheets than speeches. For years, he had kept silent, but the interview with Ibrahim Traoré had changed something in him. Sitting in a small federal office in Cleveland, he gave a statement that would ripple across the country. He didn't raise his voice or dramatize anything. He just laid it out: specific meetings, instructions to manipulate data, hidden payments routed through third-party groups, and efforts to mislead both investigators and the public. Everything was backed with documents and time-stamped messages. "The things I saw," Preston said during a closed-door briefing, "they weren't just political strategy. They were calculated, deliberate efforts to mislead people and avoid accountability. And I can't stay quiet anymore." Once parts of his statement were leaked to the press, the media firestorm reignited. It wasn't just talk anymore. This was evidence. Major newspapers published copies of emails referencing financial transfers to shell companies operating out of the Bahamas. Internal memos instructed staff on how to repackage data to make certain financial records appear clean. One particularly damning document showed a senior aide writing, "Ensure all payment logs from October appear under vendor code 6FNC. Don't ask questions. This comes from the top." For those already suspicious of Trump's operations, the leaks confirmed long-held fears. For his defenders, it created confusion and a deepening sense of doubt. Outside a courthouse in Columbus, Ohio, legal analyst Rhonda Briggs spoke to reporters. If even half of these documents are authentic, we're not just looking at political misconduct. We're looking at potential criminal charges, serious ones. Trump's legal team immediately denounced the leaks, calling them deep state fabrications. But the damage had been done. People who had defended him just days earlier were now pausing, rethinking. Meanwhile, Traoré remained quiet. He released a brief statement. "I asked the questions the public deserves answered. The truth is not mine to shape, only to seek." Behind the scenes, federal investigators began requesting interviews with former staffers, campaign contractors, and financial institutions connected to the transactions. One unnamed source described it as a net tightening. Even more surprising, two former advisors who had remained loyal through Trump's presidency issued carefully worded statements indicating their willingness to cooperate with federal inquiries. Neither mentioned Trump directly, but their shift was noticed. On talk shows, the tone changed. Political commentators who once hesitated now openly questioned Trump's innocence. "These aren't rumors anymore," said one anchor. "They're records, and they tell a very different story than the one we've heard for years." In suburban Milwaukee, a woman named Lenora Foster stood outside her home being interviewed by a local news crew. "I voted for him twice," she said, "but I'm not blind. If someone lies to you over and over again, at some point you have to say enough." Not everyone was swayed. Rallies were held in defense of Trump, with signs accusing the media of manufacturing controversy. In Springfield, Missouri, a man shouted through a megaphone, "Don't let them rewrite history." The country was pulling in two directions at once, one demanding answers, the other demanding loyalty. But the weight of the new evidence was tipping the scale. At a late-night press conference, a DOJ spokesperson confirmed that new subpoenas had been issued. "We are reviewing the documentation released this week and will follow the facts wherever they lead." The broadcast with Traoré had opened the floodgates. Now the country was wading through the consequences. And with every new detail that came to light, it became harder for anyone, even the loyal, to pretend nothing had happened. By the end of the week, Capitol Hill was buzzing like a hornet's nest. Senators, representatives, and aides whispered in hallways, took calls behind closed doors, and watched Preston Aldridge's testimony on loop. What had started as a televised clash between a journalist and a former president was rapidly mutating into a full-blown political crisis. The first to break ranks was Senator Royce Delaney from Montana, a Republican who had supported Trump since 2016. At a hastily arranged press conference, Delaney's tone was clipped and uneasy. "The documents we've seen are deeply troubling. I've stood by the president before, but I won't stand by if the law was broken. No one's above accountability." That single sentence was enough to set the tone for a political unraveling. Within hours, members of both parties began drafting statements, some vague, some direct. A few distanced themselves from Trump's orbit altogether. Others, especially those eyeing higher office, walked a careful line, voicing concern while avoiding direct condemnation. House Minority Leader Teresa Romanelli addressed the media that Friday afternoon. "The American people deserve a full and fair investigation. These allegations are not partisan talking points. They are serious legal questions that demand answers." Trump's inner circle went into overdrive. His longtime strategist, Vincent Dorn, appeared on 3 networks in one day, claiming the documents were incomplete. The whistleblower bitter, and Traoré clearly working with someone behind the scenes. But public sentiment had begun shifting. A new poll released over the weekend showed that for the first time in 5 years, more than 50% of registered voters believe Trump should face criminal investigation. That number included 19% of Republican voters, a statistic that sent shockwaves through campaign offices and PACs across the country. In Sacramento, California, Congresswoman Lonnie Cho, once a quiet backbencher, stepped into the spotlight. This isn't about red or blue, it's about right and wrong. We cannot afford to pretend this is normal. If we do, we lose more than just trust. We lose the foundation of our democracy. Cable news panels ran 24/7 coverage. Every email, quote, and body language cue from the Traoré interview was dissected like a crime scene. Analysts had sworn that the country was at a political crossroads not seen since Watergate. The White House, careful not to overstep, issued a neutral statement. We support the process of law and transparency. The Department of Justice operates independently and will continue to do so. Meanwhile, on the ground in battleground states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Arizona, voters expressed fatigue, frustration, and uncertainty. Some wanted resolution. Others wanted revenge. Many just wanted clarity. Town halls turned into battlegrounds of their own. In St. Paul, Minnesota, a city council forum descended into shouting when residents demanded local leaders denounce Trump publicly. One man stood up and yelled, "Why is everyone so afraid to say what we all saw?" Trump, holed up in his Florida state, remained mostly silent. Behind the scenes, advisors urged him to appear calm and presidential, but insiders said he was increasingly isolated and irritable. He reportedly dismissed multiple aides and replaced his legal team's lead counsel within days of the new evidence surfacing. Some of his former cabinet members, once fiercely loyal to Dinosaur, began appearing on news programs with softened tones. "Look, none of us were perfect," said former Treasury Secretary Brent Colton on a Sunday morning show. "But when things cross legal lines, we have to say so." The turning tide was impossible to ignore. What began as allegations on a broadcast had taken root in official channels: grand juries, congressional inquiries, ethics committees. Back at the studio where it all started, Ibrahim Traoré sat in his modest office with a mug of black coffee and a stack of letters, thank yous, threats, and everything in between. He looked tired but focused. In an internal memo, the network's managing editor wrote, "This isn't just news. This is a national reckoning, and we have a responsibility to handle it with truth and care." The pressure was mounting, and somewhere inside the chaos, the question everyone was now asking was no longer if, but when. The weeks that followed the explosive interview and its fallout brought a strange kind of quiet. Not silence, but the slow, grinding sound of something much larger beginning to shift. The public had spoken, whistleblowers had stepped forward, political alliances had bent under pressure, and now all eyes were on the systems meant to protect democracy itself. In a courtroom in Newark, New Jersey, federal attorneys prepared a case built on the documents and testimony that had surfaced since the broadcast. No formal charges had been announced yet, but indictments felt inevitable. Even legal experts who once dismissed the possibility now spoke cautiously, choosing their words with care. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered on both sides. Some held signs demanding Trump's arrest. Others waved flags and posters defending him with the same fervor they had for years. Across the divide, though, one thing had become clear. People were watching more closely now, more skeptically, more thoughtfully. Inside his studio, Ibrahim Traoré sat across from a different guest, a constitutional lawyer named Dr. Margot Ellington. The tone was quieter than the infamous Trump interview, but the weight of the moment hung in the air. Accountability, she said plainly, isn't about punishment alone. It's about setting standards, about telling the public that truth still matters, that no one is beyond reach. Traoré nodded slowly. What do you say to people who still believe none of this matters? That it's just noise? I tell them to look at the patterns, she replied. When people in power avoid consequences, it teaches others to do the same. It breaks down trust. If we let that continue, it's not just corruption, it's erosion. Meanwhile, schools across the country began using clips of the interview in civics and media literacy classes. Teachers asked students to identify moments of deflection, truth, and pressure. In small ways, the conversation was being passed to the next generation. At a community center in Topeka, Kansas, a local pastor, Reverend Wallace Brown, addressed a group of teens and parents. It's not about whether you like a man or not, he said. It's about whether we're willing to hold each other to the same standard, no matter who's in the spotlight. That message, fairness, equality under the law, and truth, resonated beyond politics. Traoré, in a rare personal statement posted to his channel, said, "I didn't set out to start a fire. I only wanted to ask the questions people whisper when no one's watching." The reaction wasn't about me. It was about the weight of silence being broken. Even Trump's most loyal supporters now faced a question they hadn't expected. What happens when the facts begin to outpace the talking points? Some doubled down, others quietly stepped away. A few, like Preston Aldridge, showed that even those closest to power could still choose conscience over loyalty. For many Americans, the story became less about Trump and more about what the country was willing to accept. It wasn't about political parties anymore. It was about principles. In a modest house in Birmingham, Alabama, a woman named Trina Evans, who had voted in every election since 1972, sat with her grandson. "I've seen men lie. I've seen people fall," she said. "But when the truth comes out, we have a choice: bury it or build from it." By the end of the month, congressional hearings were scheduled. DOJ investigations continued. Lawsuits stacked up. The legal process, slow and methodical, carried the weight of a nation's expectations. But beyond the headlines and courtrooms, something more subtle had begun, a national reckoning with power, truth, and how far people were willing to let things slide before they said, enough. In the final segment of his show, Traoré looked into the camera and spoke directly to his audience. If there's one thing this moment should teach us, it's this: the truth doesn't care about power, it doesn't bow to fear, and it doesn't wait for permission to rise. Whether you agree or disagree with what happened here, keep asking, keep thinking, and never let comfort replace conscience. Because silence isn't neutral, and accountability is not vengeance, it's responsibility. If this story moved you, share it, talk about it, think about it, and if you haven't already, subscribe, because more truth deserves to be heard.